Can you hear me all right?
Hi, Michael. Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Okay. Just a quick note. I was talking with Tabitha yesterday, and I wanted to make sure that I was the one who was doing the introduction. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, yes.
I
think
want to
the
make
order
absolutely sure.
was
I got it
switched.
ready, so we're just making
Yeah,
sure.
great. No problem. Yeah, the order was switched. But yeah, please feel free to take care of the introductions and I will monitor the chat.
Okay, sounds good. All right.
Okay.
Okay, I see some people trickling in, so I just wanted to say good morning, everyone, and we'll be scheduled to start in about a couple minutes. We're scheduled to start at 10:30, so just waiting for people to trickle in. Okay, so we are right at 10:30. I'm sure we'll have a couple more people trickle in, but I'll go ahead and start us off a little bit. Good morning, everyone. This is session B1, South Carolina State Historical Records Advisory Board, or SC-SHRAB for short. Readying those repositories. This session's presenter is Erin Lowry from the South Carolina Department of Archives and History. I just want to lay down just a few ground rules for this session. And I think the slide will show up the next one. Just a few ground rules. You are free to enter, leave, or switch sessions at any time. We ask that you please stay muted and with your videos off for this session. This session is scheduled to run from 10:30 to 11:15. After that, there will be a 15-minute break, so you'll have time to grab a drink, do whatever you need to get done before the next session. This session is being recorded. A recording disclaimer will appear once the recording begins. If you decline to be recorded, you will leave the session. With the exception of the business meeting, we'll be handling any questions and comments through the chat, which I believe will address those questions after the presenter has spoken and to address those questions there. Let me see. I think that is everything on my end. So I believe we were already recording. So once we get the file sharing ready, I guess I'll give it away to our presenter.
Hello, everybody. Do you need me to go ahead and share a screen?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay.
If you can.
Let me try technology. Okay, it says I have disabled share. Do I hit okay? Try that again. Yeah, host disabled attendee screen sharing, but I sent my slides in, so perhaps y'all have them.
Yes, give me one moment, sorry.
Okay, so no problem. I'm very paranoid that technology is going to break on me, so.
I will bring, just one second.
Okay, no worries.
Okay, just getting just getting everything uploaded. And let me, if you'd like, I can share my screen and then you can just let me know
That's
when to
fine.
advance slides. Does that sound okay?
That works.
Okay, sounds good. Let me just close out some other things I had open just so we have no distractions. Sorry about this delay, everyone.
Oh, no worries.
Give me one moment here. As you know, we're all kind of going along as we need to, right? So let's see here. Hold on. I will share the screen and let me do this. Share. All right. Can you all see that okay? All right. Now, Michael, I won't be able to see the chat when I share the full screen. So that's just something to keep in mind.
It's your turn now. Okay, looks good to me. So I'm assuming, I can't see chat either, so I'm assuming everybody, okay, let's see, give me a thumbs up here. Actually, I can see the chat now. So I'm guessing I'm good. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So as Michael introduced me, I'm Erin Lowry. I work for the Department of Archives and History, but I'm actually the lucky recipient to be assigned as the Deputy Coordinator for the South Carolina SHRAB, or the State Records Historical Advisory Board. And I know my presentation will not be quite as moving and wonderful as Mr. Fowler's, but I'll try to make it as exciting as I can, because I know it's a Friday morning and it's kind of hard to stay focused, but we're all in it together. I guess we'll go ahead to the next slide. So first I'm going to start with a little bit of a history of the SHRAB. I'm not going to get too bogged down. I don't know if any of you saw my colleague Jessica Hill's presentation last year. She actually was a deputy coordinator, but she had bigger and better opportunities, so now it's me. So a little bit of background on the SHRAB. It was established on November 17th, 1975 by Governor James B. Edwards via executive order. At the bottom of your screen there, you'll see just a screenshot I did of the top of the executive order. So if any of you are dying to see that, it's part of the collections at the Archives and History. But the purpose of the SHRAB was for each state to have a historical advisory board to funnel grant funds from the National Archives funding arm, which was the National Historical Public and Records Commission, or NHPRC, but to be able to funnel grant funds from that organization. And as you'll see later on in my presentation, those funds can either help the SHRAB directly, or they can be what's called re-granted to other smaller institutions. So some of the duties of the SHRAB include sponsoring surveys of conditions and needs of historical records in the state, soliciting and developing plans for historical records projects to be carried out by both the state board and other institutions, reviewing historical record project proposals by those institutions, and making recommendations to the NHPRC and reviewing the operation and progress of these approved historical projects, and to support cooperative networks and advise archival institutions that deal with historical records. Okay, we can go to the next one. So a little bit more of a history. In 1977, the SC-SHRAB was awarded its first NHPRC grants. And the 1980s through the 2000s was kind of the heyday of the SHRAB. That's when they were really active, funding was really good, everybody was happy. So during this time, several things happened. They had several re-grant projects, the four biggest being in 1990 to 93, 95 to 97, 97 to 99, and 2004 to 2006. And between those four big projects, the SHRAB funded almost 150 projects for smaller repositories. Some of the other things done during this time was that the SHRAB sponsored numerous conferences, workshops, and training sessions for local repositories. They published annual reports, a manual on religious archives and record keeping, and a directory of historical records repositories in South Carolina. And SHRAB also conducted a major study of these historical repositories in order to produce a state plan for historical records. And they also established an Archives Award program in 2002 to recognize exemplary achievement. So I also included those pictures for those of you who weren't around during the 70s and 80s and 2000s to see what records management kind of looked like back then. So, and it's kind of a reminder for those of you who were. So we can go on to the next slide. So this history goes on to a sad time, as my little smiley emoji shows you. The 2010, there was a decline of SHRABs across the country. I don't know if many of y'all remember that, there was an economic recession. The NHPRC did not have as much funding. State legislators were not willing to allocate matching funds to help with these projects. And in South Carolina's case, the resources of the Department of Archives and History were greatly reduced, both in funding and in staff. And the board actually became defunct in the 2010s. Go to the next slide. But happy times returned. In 2019, Governor Henry McMaster revived the board by beginning to reappoint members to the board. The requirements require 7 board members that are appointed by the governor, and other staff support and other resources are provided by the Department of Archives and History. The current members are Dr. Eric Emerson, who is the director of the archives, Brenda Burke, who is the head of special collections at Clemson, Kate Boyd, director of digital research services at USC, Dr. Ramath Owens, who is the professor of history emerita at Clemson University and SHRAB member since the 1990s, Gina White, director of archives and special collections at Winthrop, and Joseph Boykin, who is the former dean of libraries at Clemson, who's also been a SHRAB member since the 1990s. So we can move on. So with that reestablished board, the grant wanted to really try to get back, the board wanted to try to get back up to speed where they were during the happy times. So they applied for and received a grant for 2020. And some of the main objectives of that 2020 grant was to conduct a survey of the state archives, libraries, museums, and historical societies, to update the historical records repository directory, to conduct 4 focus groups of the historical records repositories, create an updated strategic 5-year plan for the state's historical records, and also conduct an in-depth survey of predominantly African-American repositories in South Carolina. Because as we've all learned in the past year and the past as a whole, but really, with the pandemic and everything just going on, we really just need to reevaluate how we're viewing people. Mr. Fowler said it better than I ever possibly could. So we can go to the next slide. So with the 2020 grant, as I said, one of the objectives, was to do a survey. So the survey was we created an online survey, and it was an online link that was sent to existing contacts that were on the existing historical repository directory. Anyone that was on a membership of the SCAA, the Library Association, any personal knowledge that any of these members had or suggestions. For example, one of the members suggested also including the Charleston Archives, Libraries, and Museums listserv. So we tried to get this survey out to as many different types, sizes of repositories, locations of repositories throughout South Carolina. This survey contained questions about the present levels of archival staffing, status of collections processing, current archival practices, training needs, or other deficiencies. We received 57 responses, and we use these results to update the historical repository directory and the new strategic plan. So next slide. So, and hope you can see this. I don't know what size it is on your screen, but I just wanted you to kind of see some of the questions and a lot of them, some of them were multiple choice, some of them were open-ended to try to get a little more questions, about, for example, your needs, funding, training, that kind of thing. So that's the survey questions. And if anyone wants to actually see a better copy of those, I can send those, or you may have been a participant in the survey. So if you were, thanks for your input. Next slide, please. So as I said, we used that survey to update our historical repository directory, which was the second objective of the 2020 grant. So the historical repository directory had not been updated since 2009 because of the SHRAB kind of going out of existence. It's actually available on the SHRAB webpage, which you can get to it from the Archives and Histories webpage. We have a section under publications that includes the directory. Each institution's entry includes their name, mailing and facility address, hours, contacts such as emails and phones, any links to their websites and social media. It also includes the scope of the collections. For example, what years does the collection cover? What is the historical content of records? Some of them also will include the amount of the records. And if there's any special highlights or special collections that are part of the repository, that will also be noted. So if you want to go to the next slide, and this is, I just copied and pasted this. This is an example of the entry for the Avery Center. And as you can see, it has the contact and things that I mentioned, but the links are actually live, which I think is great. So yay, technology. So if anybody's on our repository and they're reading that collection and say, yeah, I'd love to see that, they can just click and go straight into their collection. Okay, next slide, please. So the third objective of the 2020 grant was to do focus groups, statewide focus groups. So we started off beginning of 2020, I like to say BC, or before COVID, and we were able to do a couple of these focus groups in person. One was held January 24th of 2020, and that followed the Palm Cop conference. We were able to have 8 participants that represented the South Carolina Historical Society, South Caroliniana at USC, the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, Florence County Library, Newberry College, Lexington County Museum, and the Upcountry History Museum. We were able to hold a second one during the South Carolina Federation of Museums Conference that had 9 participants that represented South Carolina Humanities, McKissick Museum at USC, the Aiken County Historical Museum, South Caroliniana, Spartanburg County Historical Association, and the Red Cliff Plantation, State Historic Site. Okay, next slide, please. Then these were COVID, everybody remembers COVID kind of hit in March. So we were able to luckily continue the focus groups later in the year, but they were all held virtually. But part of me wonders if maybe that was a blessing in disguise, because we actually were able to have a few more participants than we had in person. So the November 30th focus group actually had 12 individuals that represented the Beaufort District Collection of the Beaufort County Library, the Middleton Place Foundation, the Catholic Diocese of Charleston, the Huguenot Society of South Carolina, Lake Hartwell Country, South Carolina, Pickens County Library System, Lancaster County Library, and the Charleston County Public Library. And the December meeting had 10 individuals that represented the Greenville County Library, Historical Center of York County, Middleton Place, Charleston Library Society, Wofford College, Florence Library System, Limestone, Greenwood County Library, and the College of Charleston. So again, and I think we did a pretty good job of representing a lot of repositories throughout the state and different types and sizes of repositories. So you can go to the next slide, please. So again, these are the focus group questions, and they were a little more in-depth than the survey, and we wanted to, to get a little more information just from the high-level survey kind of questions. So we can go on to the next slide. So our next objective was to create a strategic plan. So we were able to use information from the survey and those focus groups to create the strategic plan. We also had, based on those focus groups, if there was any additional conversations, we were able to also add that to our strategic plan. So the final product was a entitled "A Plan to Ensure the Preservation and Availability of the Palmetto State's Historical Records from 2021 to 2026. Again, this is available on the SHRAB webpage under publications if you'd like to look at it in more detail. But what we found based on these focus groups was there were 4 key issues that were common to South Carolina historical records repositories. And through this strategic plan, we include goals to address those issues and suggestions on how to reach them. And not only suggestions for the SHRAB member to do, but also for the actual repositories, you know, to be able to try to accomplish these goals and to improve these areas. The first one is access to and preservation of electronic records. The second topic was emergency preparedness. The third was partnerships and cooperation between archival repositories. And the first was advocacy and outreach. So we can go to the next slide. So the last but not least, and definitely not least important objective of that 2020 grant was to do a more in-depth focus group that included the state's 7 HBCUs, or the historically Black colleges and universities, and other similar African-American archives in the state of South Carolina. So we were able to have 2 sessions that were both virtual. Again, thank you, COVID. The first session was, you know, kind of a get to know you, where are we kind of thing. And the second one was able to go in a lot more depth. We had 12 participants that represented Benedict College, Claflin University, South Carolina State, Avery Center at the College of Charleston, Clinton College, Morris College, the Harriet Barber House, and the Bertha Lee Strickland Museum. And the ultimate goal, as I said before, of course, was to get feedback from the individual, you know, the people day to day hitting the ground, to discover what kind of challenges these traditionally underserved repositories may have that may not be the same that all repositories in the state are facing. Next slide, please. So these are the focus group questions for this focus group. And we actually went, I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a few more. It's a little bit longer than the other focus group questions because we wanted to go into a little, you know, dig a little deeper, go into a little more detail, because this is the group we really want to make sure, you know, we hear their voices and we're able to work with them to get those voices heard. So some of the things we went in more detail on was their actual collections, such as the formats, what popular records did they contain with them? What was the origin of their records? You know, a lot of these were affiliated with schools, kind of like Mr. Fowler was saying, you know, so that's where these records are gonna end up through school, you know, HBCUs. Several got them from donors. We also focused on the staff of these repositories. You know, what kind of training did they have? What kind of formal education did they have? What numbers of staff did they have? And if they had any other concerns, any issues other than funding, such as, are there any other repositories they know of that maybe have some ideas or some processes that they would like to implement? So again, we tried to go a little bit deeper with these to get, you know, a better idea of what kind of challenges they're facing. Next slide, please. So based on the feedback from these 2 focus groups, some of the specific concerns that we learned was that as far as the archive staff, they were very small, to say the least. Some of them didn't even have actual archivists. They had, you know, library employees who would do a little bit of archival work when they had time in addition to their regular duties. A lot of them used student interns or volunteers. As I said before, a lot of them lacked a full-time archivist, or the people that were serving in that role had an overall lack of formal archival training or education. And this lack of dedicated staff time also meant that it didn't allow them time to create or update mission statements or their collection policies. As far as their collections, most of them were paper-based. They all agreed that digitization was a daunting task, both for staff time and cost, which they apparently, you know, have neither based on their feedback. They also added that if they did have some collections that had been digitized, perhaps by volunteers or interns, they needed to process those collections in order to make them accessible. They also noted that a lot of them took in some private donations, so they had other concerns to deal with, such as deeds of gifts or copyright or other related legal issues, you know, in order to be able to get those materials out to the public. And finally, we touched on social media. And most of them had a website or a Facebook page, but they didn't feel that they were being best used to publicize their collections or their institutions as a whole. So we can go to the next slide, please. So from this, we said, okay, we've got this feedback. What can we do to improve the situation for these repositories? So with our 2021 grant, we built on that 2020 grant, and we actually planned a workshop. And the workshop the goal was to host a workshop for a day of networking and training that was geared toward the needs of these HBCUs and other African American repositories within South Carolina. And based on the feedback from those focus groups, some of the topic we felt we needed to address were the archival basics, such as document preservation on a budget, outreach, social media, handling board digital material, digitization, disaster planning, grant writing, records management, policy and procedure writing, and possibly even a museum crossover for those that got artifacts from their donors. Next slide, please. So we also thought about, okay, well, those are the topics we need to address, but who would most benefit? Of course, we had, our individuals who attended the feedback, but we also got some assistance from the Archives and History. Actually had a position here, the African American coordinator. So we worked with him, and we also invited the people that had attended those feedbacks to give, focus groups to give us some feedback about, who do they think we should, what organizations are we not reaching out to that we should invite to this presentation. So representatives from the following institutions were invited. All of the 7 HBCUs, which were Allen, Benedict, Claflin, Clinton, Morris, Voorhees, and SC State. The other repositories that were invited was individuals from the Penn Center, the Avery Center, the Bertha Strickland Museum, the Harriet Barber House, the Southern African American Heritage Center, the Jamestown Foundation, the Center for African American History, Art, and Culture, and the Cassandra Williams Rush African American Museum, and the Clemson Area African American Museum. And we also extended the invitation to members of the South Carolina African Heritage Commission. Next slide, please. So the workshop was held on Monday, September 20th, 2021, and it was a full day, and it was fabulous, though. I mean, I know I'm a little biased because I helped plan it, but it was a full day of sessions from 9 to 4:30, so we had lots of information we shared. And as part of the grant, which was wonderful, lunch was provided, and we were able to reimburse any attendees that were more than 30 miles from the Archives and History. So that was great, and I hope that really encouraged more people to attend. Next slide, please. So here is the agenda. Again, I hope it's big enough for y'all to see, but as you can see, like I said, it went from 9 to about 4:30. That included lunch and some breaks. And our goal of the agenda was to try to kind of start with that archival basics and to kind of build on the topics as the day went on. Kind of just, build on that learning kind of situation. Okay, next slide, please. So now I'm going to do what everybody wanted to see, and I'm going to highlight some of the sessions or all of these sessions from the workshop. And again, like I said, they're all wonderful. I mean, I can't say that one of them was any better than any, and I hated that I was, having to coordinate it and couldn't sit and watch the entire day, but it was great. And following each session, we had a lot of great questions and conversation. And again, thanks to COVID, we didn't have a ton of people come, but I felt like the people that did come, I really feel like they got they learned something and got something out of this based on the discussion that followed each session. So the morning session, we had Mr. Cecil Williams, who is the founder of the Cecil Williams South Carolina Civil Rights Museum. And his topic was the startup of a low budget South Carolina Civil Rights Museum. And some of his highlights of his presentation was he actually talked about his personal experiences of converting a home that he purchased into a museum. He pointed out to know when, know your limits, know when to use volunteers, because, his strengths within the records. So he actually was able to have volunteers come in and do the plumbing and the electrical for his museum, to make it accessible to people, accessible in another way. He also talked about any relationships with donors. one big thing he talked about was, which I'll kind of go in the next part, collection policies. He talked about, his big thing was what is the definition of civil rights in South Carolina? When in time did that begin? And what sort of information should you collect? So through that thought and dealing with the individuals that were involved with that movement, he was able to form relationships with not only those individuals, but now their family members, any politicians that may have been involved. And he was actually able to get some additions to her collections based on those relationships, which kind of goes into the next topic. He also added that he had relationships with some other institutions, specifically the HBCUs, I believe Claflin, and SC State. He used a lot of their students that were in the film things to process his film collection. So again, good way to save money, use those students. They benefit from exposure and, experience, and he benefits by having that film available. And finally, which I thought was just great, he also gave some tips and pointers for inexpensive ways to make displays and to have signage at your institution. Next slide, please. The next speaker was Constance Cadell. She was a graduate assistant at the USC Center for Civil Rights History and Research. And her topic was Today's Modern Archives, Conservation, Preservation, and Publication. And again, she went in a lot more detail than I'm going to cover here, but some of the highlights of what she spoke about was for conservation. She also talked about donor gifts, and she kind of thought about it not only once it becomes part of your collection and how to care for it then, but you also want to think kind of about the history of that gift. How are the individuals keeping it before they gave it to your collection? And I thought that was kind of an interesting way to look at it. She gave preservation tips for both paper and digital collections. And she also talked about ways to publicize your collection through events, tours, exhibits, community engagement, and digital and online partnerships. And you'll see a lot of these ideas kind of show up. So if you're wanting, ways to think about expanding your repository, you'll see a lot of that community engagement, online partnerships. A lot of these speakers brought that up. Next slide, please. Next, and this one was a tearjerker. And like I said, I had to keep coming and going because this one was moving. This was Dr. Rhonda Thomas. She is the Calhoun Lemon Professor of Literature at Clemson University. And she spoke about the project she's working on called Call My Name, using the archives and the internet to enhance public engagement Black history projects. And what she did was she talked about, she is a professor, of course, at Clemson. So she talked about her experience of coming to Clemson, and specifically how she saw a plantation house, and that just it hit her personally. So what she did was she kind of turned it on its head. So she actually wanted to talk about, focus on the African American experience of Clemson University, and she broke it down by 7 generations, from the enslaved persons that actually helped construct Clemson to today's 21st century student activists, who are continuing to make their voices heard. So she actually used existing archival records at Clemson, such as convict labor records, up through today's continuing current events, such as student protests, to give a name and a voice to those traditionally underrepresented groups that in Clemson history. And again, like I said before, she spoke about the online presence of her project, exhibits, and tours. Next slide, please. The next one was Margaret Dunlap. She is with the Walker Local History Room at Richland Library, and her topic was digging into digital projects, getting started with a new digital collection. So she provided steps that your institution can use on ways to create an institutional digital collection. And those steps were you're going to select, scan, upload, search, and see the statistics of your users. She also pointed out, which I'm actually in records management here, so when I talk to people, I tell them, don't go scan crazy, because you may not necessarily want to scan everything. So she kind of touched on that. Reason you might want to create a digital collection is you want to think about what is in your collection that needs a lot of user access, or what is in a state that would need to be preserved. So those are some of the things you'd want to think about scanning and digitizing. Again, she talked about online partnerships that would broaden the access of your collection. For example, some of their records will show up in the South Carolina Digital Library or the Digital Public Library of America. And individuals, may be looking at a specific topic. She actually brought up a picture they had of Malcolm X. Someone may come looking for for Malcolm X and those other collections and say, hey, what does the state library, or excuse me, the Richland Library have? So again, a good way to broaden your access by having those online collaborations. Next, please. Next was Mauricio Orozco. He is the Public Information Coordinator, IT Director, and Data Privacy Liaison with the South Carolina Commission for Minority Affairs. And his topic was how to build relationships through social media. And he kind of tried to give us some meaning, because like I said, I'm a little techno scared here. But he provided ways for repositories or institutions to use social media to grow your community involvement, to get your repository out there, to bring allies to your cause. Why is your repository important? And to bring meaning to, what you're doing. Why are you putting these records out there? Why should anybody come and look at your collection? He actually went through several different social media platforms and explained the specific purpose of why you may want to use that platform. For example, he said that Instagram could be a really good way to kind of have some behind the scenes images of your institution. And he also had examples of some social media sites that he had gone to that encouraged interaction with users. So instead of being static, these are some sites that really wanted some feedback from users. So those would be good things for some of these repositories to use to kind of mirror the way these sites were looking. Next slide, please. Next was Michelle Van Allen. She is the Manager of Records Management and Paralegal Services with Santee Cooper. And her topic was putting a disaster plan into action. And she actually was able to share her personal experiences of disasters at both their agency record center and a hair salon that she actually owns with her daughter. So poor Michelle, you always hear disasters will happen, and she is an example of that. She kind of went through the steps they took when they had, of course, unexpected disasters. She talked about the immediate response. When you get there and you come in and you open the door and water greets you. She said, you want to damage the assessment of your records, the storage facility, and the building. She also talked about preparation, when you're not having a disaster. She had mentioned that in both of these cases, they had an existing disaster plan in place. And she also had a really handy, quick, like a flip chart, quick reference thing that was based on different types of disasters. And you could just go, oh, fire, and, flip up and go quick tips on how to immediately respond. She also talked about some of her lessons learned, specifically relationships with vendors and emergency response. Because, emergency response people aren't always looking at records the way we do as archivists. Their goal is, let's get these out of here, get them out of the way and don't worry about them. But that's not going to fly with us, because we're like, no, those are special, important, treat them with care kind of thing. She also added that you need to do periodic inspection of your facility and update of your disaster plans, specifically making sure your employee contacts are up to date. Next slide, please. And last but not least was Miss Janie Harriet. She is a businesswoman and the former South Carolina African American Heritage Commission chairperson, and her topic was on demystifying grant writing. And again, she also talked about her personal experiences writing grants, not only for herself, but she also, part of that business is to assist others to get grants. She gave several good tips for writing a grant proposal, including 7 key elements, such as knowing your mission and finding like funders, doing whatever necessary research you need to do to make your grant stronger, and to tell a good story. Don't just be the facts. Make sure you convince those funders that you are the grant that needs to be chosen, or that your application is the one that needs to be chosen for that grant. She also provided resources not only for grant writing, but for available grants that might apply to some of these repositories. So I hope at this point, some of you are thinking, well, man, I really wish I could have been there. So if you will go to the next slide. Lucky for you, part of the grant was that we recorded each of these sessions. So they're actually available again on the SHRAB webpage. Each one of them is on there. You can link to each individual one. There's a section called 2021 Workshop. So if you're interested in a little more detail about any of those sessions, they're on our webpage. And one good thing that kind of came out of this was to do the recordings. I worked with some staff at South Carolina Educational Television, or SCETV, and we were actually able to form some unintentional relationships with SCETV. One of the neatest ones was that they're actually working on a documentary for Mr. Cecil Williams. So we kind of got a bonus where they were able to use some of the footage of his presentation. Plus, they did an interview with him and some of the other attendees of the conference, to get to a fuller picture of Mr. Williams. And also, when I was talking with them, they said, hey, we have some education staff here that deal with social studies teachers. Can they attend this workshop to, so hopefully the things they got from this workshop, the needs of these repositories, maybe they can go out to these social studies, and in the schools and say, hey, let's change the way we're looking at stuff. Let's do it this way. So that's what I'm hoping comes out of that. So next slide, please. So our future goals, as you've noticed, that we've been trying to kind of build, 2020, we tried to get, back up to speed, make sure we knew, who's out there, what kind of needs do you have. This year, 2021, we did that workshop to try to, help with education and that kind of thing. So our next hopeful grant for next year, for 2022 and actually 2023, would be to do what's called a re-grant. And I kind of touched on this a little bit before, but a re-grant program is where the SHRAB gets the funding directly from NHPRC, and then we will distribute to other smaller local repositories. However, these repositories must apply for the funding and meet specific criteria through the SHRAB. So we will know about mid-November, so the next couple of weeks, whether or not we get that grant, which fingers crossed. So if we are awarded it, we are planning to have some virtual information sessions in February, March, and April of next year to kind of explain the guidelines, what criteria you need to meet, and the application instructions. I will say that priority consideration will go to traditionally underserved institutions such as the HBCUs, other primarily African American repositories, and any smaller institutions in rural areas. We also have a preference for projects that focus on digital accessibility and preservation, and any projects that increase the public engagement with the historical records, or those that provide training and developmental opportunities for archival staff and volunteers. And each grant will be at a most up to $5,000. So that's what the re-grant amount will be. Next slide, please. So this is my contact information if you have any other questions, or if you are looking at our historical repository and you say, hey, I'm not here, or hey, that's not right, get with me and we can update it. And again, if you check out that SHRAB website, all the publications, presentations, all that good stuff is on there. So that's it for me. If anybody has any questions, please ask.
Thank you, Erin, for your presentation, and not only letting us know what SHRAB's been doing, but also what SHRAB's participants are doing. It's kind of interesting to see the different perspectives at that workshop, or I thought were particularly interesting. I'm monitoring the chat, and I see we have the webpage link for SHRAB on the chat already, as well as the link to the publication, a plan to ensure the preservation and availability of the Palmetto State's historical records. We have about 5 minutes. So do we have any questions in the chat?
Nothing new has come through, but I actually have a question. Oh, I can turn my video on. We deal a lot, or at least talk a lot, about digital preservation. Actually, my own institution suffered a ransomware attack where a lot of files and data, the archives did not lose anything because of sound locks practices. So thanks for that. But at the same time, what are some recommendations or sources that you could share through SHRAB on digital preservation, on proper digital record keeping? I guess with only 5 minutes, you may not be able to get through it all, but
and we haven't really, that may be included. I think we're looking more at a, how can we work together kind of thing.
Okay.
So hopefully, others can come to us and say, but we really haven't touched on that. Because again, I think digitization, it's daunting, it's overwhelming everyone right now. So we're all kind of like, what do we do at this point kind of thing?
Yes.
So look and see if there's more, because like I said, I know we touch on it, but I don't know that we touch that much on,
Okay.
and that could be something, you know, we could look into doing.
Yeah, and perhaps that could be a future like joint SCAA, SHRAB type of conference or
Definitely.
webinar, that type of thing, because I know that for probably all of us on this call, we are all grappling with not just digitization projects, but digital preservation projects as well.
Right.
So
And that may also be in Constance Cadell and Margaret Dunlap. They may go into more detail in that in their presentations.
No, I
Any
was
other
just gonna.
questions? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's okay. The beauty of virtual here, right? No, I was just going to say too, I think that it was a great question because I think there's opportunities for collaboration that can happen between different organizations because it is something that we're all struggling with. And how do we, and some of it too is just, the resources alone, finding them can be daunting. So are there ways that there can be collaborations and that type of thing?
And maybe when we do our next strategic plan, we'll have all the answers. That'll be 5 years from now.
I think that's one of the nice things too about SHRAB is that, it's that communication factor and that networking, that to have that SHRAB as a resource that can really help make connections for people. And that was, missing there for a while. So now that it's more active and the other, different organizations such as SCAA and all of that, hopefully we can start finding things to, ways to really move ahead in some of these issues.
Are there any more questions? We have about 2 more minutes left. Not seeing any more. Going once, going twice. All right. I guess, oh, this says, what a fantastic project. Thanks for sharing, Erin. All right, if there's nothing else on, I want to, once again, thanks our presenter for letting us know about SHRAB and what they're working on right now. And thank you for all the participants attending this session. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of the conference. Have a good one, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.